Hello again, Dan. So it's been an interesting week at City Hall. We're losing one of our counselors. What's going on there?
Yeah, so Christine Boyle, who is the only Vancouver councillor representing the One City Party, she ran as an NDP candidate in the new riding of Vancouver Little Mountain in the provincial election, and she was elected. She won handily, getting more than double the number of votes of the Conservative challenger, who also coincidentally is a former Vancouver municipal politician, former Park Board Commissioner John Cooper, who ran for the Conservatives. So uh, Councillor Boyle, it was expected that, her winning would mean that she'll be stepping down, but she was kind of not speculating, or she was keeping her cards pretty close to her chest, sort of in terms of when she'd be leaving and how it would all work. So we were kind of, there's speculation there, and we weren't sure. But she did have a meeting eventually with the city clerks, and then earlier this week, she did formally announce her timeline. Her plan is she already basically submitted a formal application, a formal, request for leave to take an unpaid leave, which will basically start immediately as soon as council approves her request. And then her expectation is that she will formally resign. Excuse me. She'll formally resign in December, but she's going to start her unpaid leave as soon as it's approved, which means that she's not going to be participating at meetings that'll be happening in November, including council votes and stuff like that. The idea, they wanted to basically delay her formal resignation until December, so that they don't have to worry about sort of organizing a by-election, or, when they're dealing with the holiday season as well as the budget. The budget is a very busy time of year that typically happens towards the end of the year. So city staff had requested her to sort of delay her formal resignation, because then there's kind of rules about how quickly the by-election has to be called after an election officer is appointed and all that stuff. So essentially, she won't be participating in meetings or votes during November, which is something I wasn't sure whether she would be or not previously.
Okay. And just remind people, the mayor and ABC hold how many seats on council now?
So there are 7 ABC councillors plus the mayor. So that means that the party represents 8 out of 11 votes on council. So obviously that's still the case. Boyle was one of only 3 non-ABC votes on council. She was the only member of One City on council. And so her departure basically means there will be an empty seat until it's filled with a by-election. So now we have 8 ABC votes and 2 Green votes. So Boyle's departure and the timing of it means, she won't be around for discussions around the budget. She won't be around to vote on the budget. She also won't be around for what could be a fairly contentious vote around the use of natural gas heating in buildings. That's expected to be coming up in November.
And sorry, that's one where you could have one or more potentially ABC councillors break ranks potentially.
Well, yeah, they already sort of, a couple of them already have, voted against the party majority back in July, when sort of the initial vote directing staff to amend the bylaws to allow natural gas. 2 ABC councillors, Lisa Dominato and Peter Meisner, voted against the majority, the rest of their party colleagues, which is one of the rare times that's happened so far in the first 2 years of this term. Most votes, at least most significant, important votes, ABC has voted together as a block, kind of like Vision almost always did when they had a majority at City Hall. But this was noteworthy. So it ended up being a very close vote, because Boyle, as well as the 2 Green councillors, voted against changing the city's policy on natural gas. Meisner and Dominato voted with them. So it was a 6-5 vote, with the mayor phoning in from overseas, basically to break the tie. So we don't know what'll happen when it comes back, when the sort of amended building bylaws come back for final adoption in November. Usually bylaw adoption votes are just done on consent. Council just kind of rubber stamps the whole thing and says, we've already discussed this, here it's come back. That's usually what happens with bylaw adoptions. However, this one, there could be further debate about it. And we don't know if all of the 6 ABC members who supported it back in July will vote the same way in November. At least one of them, Rebecca Bly, has already said publicly, she said to me in an interview that she didn't say she's definitely going to oppose it, but she didn't say she's definitely going to support it. She said it's not a foregone conclusion that because she voted with the majority in July, that she'll vote the same way in November. Now, the reason Boyle matters here is, it was a 6-5 vote back in July, so Boyle won't be voting.
Right.
However, essentially, if
so that's 6-4. Sorry, that makes it 6-4.
That would make it 6-4.
Then if one flipped, like if Rebecca Bly did go over, it would be 5-5 then.
Yes. And so that's the key thing, is that a tie in this situation is the same as a rejection, because you need a majority of the votes on council to adopt a bylaw. Right. Again, they're almost always just adopted on consent, but essentially, if Bly or someone else does change from support to oppose, then it would be 5-5, assuming that none of the other people change their votes back, which could also happen. So we really don't know what's going to happen. The vote might fall. Everyone might vote exactly the same way they did before, which would mean it's 6-4. If one of the pro votes changes to against, it would be 5-5 if no one else changes. So that means it would die. It wouldn't be approved. But of course, we don't know. I mean, I certainly expect that the two Green councillors, Adrian Carr and Pete Fry, I don't think they're going to change their votes to support this. They've been very public about their displeasure with this, as have a lot of climate activists and people like that. Now, but I don't know if one of the ABC councillors, Meisner or Dominato, the ones who opposed initially, maybe they'll change their vote back. I don't know. They spoke at the time about their reasons for opposing this. They worried about the city moving backwards on its climate targets. But I mean, one way that Boyle's absence could matter more for that vote is if another council member is absent and it's a 9-member vote instead of a 10-member vote. Right. So we don't know what'll happen.
Okay, well, some intrigue before then. And then we're probably going to have a by-election. I know it's not a set date, but what are you anticipating? When are city voters going to head to the polls?
Maybe February or March kind of seems like, I think, a reasonable guess. So essentially, what the rules say is that the council has to appoint a chief election officer to run the by-election as soon as practicable after a vacancy opens up on city council. And then that officer has, I believe, 80 days, has to set a by-election date within 80 days of being appointed. Now, as to the question of how quickly council has to appoint the election officer, there's not actually a strict timeline. It just says as soon as practicable. So in theory, if they say, well, it's not practicable for us to do this during the Christmas season or during when we're busy with budget. So the timeline, that's the question on the timeline, is when does council actually appoint that officer? Maybe they don't appoint them until the new year. We don't know for sure. But that's, I mean, February or March or maybe even April seems kind of like a reasonable guess. And Boyle's party, One City, has already publicly said they fully plan to run someone to replace their only councillor. And the party co-chair told me that it's they're talking with the other sort of progressive left leaning parties and trying to encourage them to sort of back One City's candidate as kind of a unity candidate so that the progressive vote isn't split. ABC, is expected to likely run someone to extend their supermajority, and then they'd have 9 out of 11 votes as opposed to the 8 they currently have. And then the Green Party, which of course is the only other party currently represented on council, their party leadership told me that they have not made a firm decision one way or the other. They're having conversations. One thing all 3 parties did say is they wanted to congratulate Councillor Boyle on her election as an MLA. The mayor read out an announcement congratulating her. The Greens said they wanted to congratulate her. And of course, One City, I think mixed feelings for them. They're obviously happy that she won, but sad to lose the only elected councillor they've had so far. They also do have an elected school board trustee, but Councillor Boyle's the only person they've had on city council.
Right. So they clearly have the most at stake here, I would imagine, because as you say, ABC already has their majority. They could disappear from City Hall entirely this election, which would be a significant setback 2 years out from the next election. I guess the Greens have the potential to increase their footprint by 50%, which is good for them. And ABC, I mean, these by-elections are typically a bit of a referendum can be on the governing party.
Mhm.
Historically, I don't know if you've had time to look back yet to see how ruling parties tend to fare in by-elections.
There haven't been that many council by-elections, at least in Vancouver. The only one in the last couple of decades was 2017, when Jeff Meggs, Vancouver councillor Jeff Meggs, resigned his seat to go take a job in Victoria as then Premier John Horgan's chief of staff. So that triggered a by-election, which, people at the time kind of described it as a bit of a, referendum on the Vision Vancouver, which at that time had been running Vancouver with 3 successive supermajorities on council. They were, I guess, at the time in their 9th year of running Vancouver. And the NPA won. The NPA ran Hector Bremner, who ran for council and then kind of in the next election soon after that tried to run for mayor, which didn't work out for him. But so that, Vision lost. Vision ran a good candidate and lost. By-elections are tricky. There is kind of this conventional wisdom that maybe they are often hard on the governing party because, but it's typically a pretty small turnout. It's not a lot of people are actually casting votes in a by-election, municipal by-election. Yeah. And so, there is that conventional wisdom that often it's hard on the ruling party, but, ABC is definitely going to have some significant advantages too. I would imagine they've got money and volunteers and a base, and they've got a lot of, people know who they are. They know the name. They've got all these incumbent councillors and the mayor to kind of throw their support behind whoever they run. So, ABC, I would think it would have a lot of advantages as well.
Okay. Well, we're barely over the provincial election, but now we got a by-election to look forward to. So that'll be fun, Dan. Thanks. We'll talk to you again next week.
Great. Thanks, Harold. Thank you.